All right, good afternoon. My name is John Wharf, and I'm with MCNC here in North Carolina. As well, have with me here Tim Weiss from DPI, as well as some fellow folks here in the room at MCNC that we're doing the Google Apps User Management Training. This will be a 2-hour webinar for discussing Google Apps user management with a series of tools. If you could, please make sure that you sign in to today's event so that we can communicate with you at a later time for evaluations and such things along those lines. Today's session will be recorded. If you have questions throughout the session, if you could please post them in the question box, and then we'll be able to relay those here into the session, whether it's during that time or at the Q&A at the end of the session. We will have a few minutes for Q&A later on. So today we're going to be discussing Google Apps and user management. So are you using Google Apps? Currently across the state of North Carolina, we have a lot of folks using Google Apps, whether it's for email, documents, sites, the whole suite, or if it's just Google Apps. Now, for using Google email and everything, we currently have 69 school districts across the state of North Carolina that are using it for email as well as apps and the whole suite of tools. Now, as well, we also have about 4 to 5 more districts that are going to be coming on board here in the near future. So one of the big things that comes into play is, how do we manage our users? Well, Google has put together several different tools, as well as there's some third-party tools that we're going to talk about today. So our agenda today is we're going to talk about Google Apps Directory Sync. You'll also hear it referred to as GADS. And then we're also going to talk about Google Apps Password Sync, GAPS, and Google Apps Manager, GAM. So, and then we're also going to have some time for some Q&A. Now, with each of these different topics, we will be going into a live demonstration after we go through and talk about the different points and the different tools that options that these have for us. We'll be doing a live demonstration, a couple of different things with some of the sites that I have access into. So, Google Apps Directory Sync. Many folks have a directory service, whether it's Active Directory, eDirectory, or LDAP. So with your local directory, we can populate your users up on Google. Now, using the directory sync tool, there's a whole suite of different things that we can populate up to Google. We can do your users, we can do groups, we can do your organizational units, we can also do profiles. And we're going to go through and we're going to talk about each one of those and how we can in turn make it synchronized to Google. Now, GADS is really the only way that we can synchronize profile information in a relatively easy fashion. Profile information being if you populate the school location, the graduation year, or whatever the case may be of your students, we can populate that up on Google. As well, we can select the different pieces that you need to populate. We can also do multiple directories. Multiple directories being if you're still in that process of moving from eDirectory to Active Directory, or all of your users are not in one directory, or maybe you only have staff in your Active Directory but students are not in there, then we can still work with you to be able to have multiple directories. We may have to use multiple tools to make it happen, but we have that possibility and that functionality to be able to do so. So we're going to dive in and take a look at that here in just a few minutes. Now, if you are using the GADS sync, you can also take advantage of Google Apps Password Sync. In both cases with GADS and GAPS, these are one-way pushes to Google. It's not synchronizing Google back to your Active Directory or from anything along those lines. It's your directory pushing to Google Apps. So with GAPS, as a user changes their password in Active Directory, we can have it automatically change your password on Google to be the exact same thing. The times that this comes in handy is definitely if you're using a single sign-on, or if you're wanting to institute this as a single sign-on mechanism, we can synchronize the passwords from Active Directory to Google Apps all so that anytime they change it, it's automatically done. Now, if you have a password management tool that synchronizes with your Active Directory, this will also work in that same form and fashion. The way that GAPS works is it intercepts the password as it's been changed. There's a certain DLL that it utilizes on the server to where it intercepts your password and then sends it off to Google in an encrypted form to send it to Google Apps for storing on their server to be the same password as what you have in your Active Directory. This is for Active Directory only, and you install it on all of your domain controllers. Anywhere that a user's password could be changed, you need to make sure that you set this on that server. Now, you may populate the email address attribute, you may not. We're going to dive in and take a look at that, but we can specify different attributes if needed to populate Google Apps. So a tool that I like, I use on a regular basis, is produced by a company called Ditto, is Google Apps Manager. It's a command line driven tool that you can utilize to take advantage of your domain to do a lot of different types of things. It allows for easy scripting to be able to say, okay, if you don't have a directory service, we can script your creation of users. I've got one school district that does not have a directory service for their students. So what we do every year when they have their students is we use Google Apps Manager to script it to suspend 23,000 students and then move those 23,000 students wherever they may need to be moved in the Google organization. And then that will in turn control several different aspects from there as well. It supports multiple operating systems, so you can run it from a Windows, a Linux, or a Mac OS environment. Multiple domain support being we can run this from, if you have multiple domains, you can set it up to where you have 2 different folders that will do different types of things. We get additional reporting out of this. You get reporting out of GAM that you're not going to get from anywhere else. So with GAM, we can actually pull information such as who are all our users that have aliases, or if we need to pull several different types of pieces of information, we can do so from here. And we'll take a look at that as well here in a few minutes. And you can see things that are not in your Google Apps dashboard. We can also manage your Chromebook devices from the Google Apps Manager to where you can move things. You've got a Chromebook that you've received that you want to move it to a certain organizational unit. You can do so within the command line, or you could do it by hand from the GUI interface. Now, it's not so bad when you're doing just one, but when you've got to move 1,000, 2,000 devices, it may make a lot more sense to do it through the command line interface. And we'll talk about how you can script that and be able to do those different types of things. So I've got some additional resources. We'll come back to this here in a few minutes. But as I told you, I had just a short little presentation that I wanted to take you through, and then we're going to dive in and take a look at several different things. So I'm logged in through a remote desktop to a Active Directory server. If I can remember which password I have on it. So I log in, and you see I have my Active Directory. Now notice that we have several different things here in our Active Directory. Now you're going to need to be able to read your Active Directory and go through and view several different pieces. Now for me, I go in and I can view underneath my High School 1. Notice I have Google Test and I have Staff, High School 1, and I can see that I have a high school staff member. If I go to the properties of it, I can see that I have several different things. Now I'm populating the display name, I'm not populating an office or a description or anything like that. I am populating the email address field. If you are planning to use Google Apps Directory Sync, or if you're planning to use the base defaults of Google Apps Password Sync, you will need to make sure that that email address field is populated. And we'll talk more about that here in just a second. a key thing that I like to look at as well is the attribute editor. I like to enable my attribute editor, and the way that I do that is go to View and then Advanced Features, so that I can view my attribute editor and see all the attributes that can be set or are set with my account. So you can see a lot of different types of things from inside of here. Now this will come in more handy here in a few minutes. Now, I also have a Windows XP box. Now, Windows XP is end of life and, starting to fade away. These tools do run on Windows 7, Windows 8. You can run GADS from your server if you choose to. But for my instance here, I have a Windows XP virtual machine that I'm logged into and can take advantage of. So I've already pre-installed. I went out and downloaded Google Apps Directory Sync. I have my Google Apps Directory Sync installed, and I can easily go to my Configuration Manager. So I bring up Configuration Manager, and it's coming up here. Sorry about the slowness with this machine. Once my Directory Sync tool comes up, you'll see that it's going to have a very base level configuration. Now, from it, it automatically chooses user accounts and groups. Now, up at the top, I have mine labeled as Untitled 1. So it's labeled as Untitled 1. It's not currently named or anything along those lines. Now, if your screen comes up like mine is showing now, by default, and a lot of times when you're remote desktoped in or something along those lines, things don't go right and you can't necessarily move to the top, can't view your stuff. I like to go and tell mine to maximize. That gives me the right to be able to see my bar and to be able to go do File Save As. If you've already set up Google Apps Directory Sync one time, you can go to your Open Recent and you can see that you have a configuration file. Now I'm going to pull up my configuration file that I've already pre-set up, but we're going to go through and talk about several other different pieces with it. Now notice that in our general settings we can set up organizational units, user accounts, groups, user profiles, shared contacts, and calendar resources. Now we're going to discuss, for the most part, we're going to stick to the 4 basics up at the top. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to go to my Google Apps configuration. Now you see that I've got my primary domain name. Now the domain that I'm going to be working with today is k12gapps.mcnc.org. Yours may be your school district of whatever.k12ncus or whatever the case may be. Now, if you are not populating email addresses in your domain, in your Active Directory, you're an Active Directory shop, but you were previously group-wise for your email, so you never populated the email addresses in your Active Directory, whatever the case may be, we can force everyone to get the primary domain name as their email address. I don't necessarily recommend that. I would rather you go ahead and populate the email address field for all of your users. Now, we have 2 ways of authenticating to our Google Apps. We can use the OAuth, or we can use the administrator credentials. One thing that we need to check first is we need to verify that we have OAuth enabled for domain. So if you open up your admin console, admin.google.com, you can see here I was logged into another district earlier looking at something. If I just remove that, and I can log into my K12G apps, there's going to be a couple of things that you're going to want to make sure that you have turned on. Now this is the old configuration settings. Now if I go to my advanced tools and I scroll down to my OAuth domain key, I need to make sure that I have the OAuth consumer secret turned on. And as well, I need to make sure that I have access to the APIs enabled as well. Then we also need to go to our domain settings and go to our user settings and then enable API access. This will enable us to be able to synchronize our directory service with Google Apps. Now, if you're in the new administration console, we can go in and do the same thing. Now, in the new administration console, you're going to want to go down to security, and then you're going to want to go to API reference, enable your API access, and then you want to go to the advanced settings, and then go down to manage OAuth domain key. And then you need to make sure that you enable the consumer secret there as well. Now that I've got that enabled and activated, now I can either use the OAuth authentication. Now that is the recommended practice. The reason that that is recommended is because if your email address password changes or anything along those lines, then you would have to go back into GADS and change that password inside of there as well. Now for me, I like to set up an admin account for my GADS, whether it's using administrator or GADS admin or whatever the case may be. That would be a user that GADS would use to synchronize from my directory service. That way I know that's GADS making those changes on my Google Apps domain. Now I can go through, I've already put in my admin user email address and my admin password, and I test my connection. Uh-oh, my failed. I'll have to come back in here and check that out here in just a second. But it worked last night, I promise you. Never fails when you're doing something live on the fly, that something goes awry. So one of the things, this may be a good point to bring about, is if you are running Zscaler, this machine is going through Zscaler. So with that, if I can remember, I go through my dashboard, go to policy admin. For this, if you want, you can actually turn on and off. Now, for me, this is my device that I've got set up that's running through my GRE tunnel. Now, one thing that I recommend to folks is for your GADS server, it does not necessarily like the SSL scanning. So what I do is I'll add a sublocation with a static IP address to bypass my Zscaler access. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just turn off my SSL and my authentication temporarily for this location. Now in your environment, you're going to want to add a sublocation so that you can have an external IP address for just that server so that it will automatically not do SSL scanning. So I've done that, I've activated now. And like I said, don't you love it when things aren't necessarily exactly what you thought they would be? So now I've told it to test my connection. It's going through, it's logging in. It should log into my server and work this time. Let me hit cancel here. And this time you see I've connection succeeded. Great. Now if I go down to my LDAP configuration over on the left hand side, you see that I've already preset my stuff up. So I've got Microsoft Active Directory chosen because I am using a directory service. Now if you have Open LDAP, you can choose that, or Lotus Domino, you can choose that as well. So I've got Microsoft Active Directory, I'm using standard LDAP, and I'm using my IP address rather than a host name. If you have a host name, you can use the host name if you choose to. This is inside of our lab environment that we're using as a test area. So I've got that in there as that. Now, if you're not sure if you're using SSL or not using SSL for your connection type, you can try the LDAP with SSL, but 9 times out of 10, most districts, they're using just standard SSL. So the next piece that I've got is my authentication. We can do simple or anonymous authentication to your Active Directory. I like to do authentication access to my Active Directory, but if you have anonymous turned on, basically all it needs to do is be able to walk across your directory to be able to see, okay, users, what OU they're in, who's suspended, who's active, things along those lines. So here I've got my CNE / CNE admin, that's my user, and then I've got my password keyed in. Now, I have a base DN set up. Base DN being where you're wanting to start walking across your LDAP. So for me, I'm starting at the top at cne.org. So I've got DC equals cne, comma, DC equals org. Excuse me. So yours may be something along the lines of cne.local. So you've got cne, comma, DC equals local. I can test that connection, and I've got a connection succeeded, 100%. That's great. I'm connected to my LDAP server. Next, we want to go down to our org units. Now, what this does is it mimics your organizational structure from your Active Directory and pushes it to Google Apps. Now, we're going to go through and we're going to just let it run, and then we're going to go back in and we're going to do some modifications to it. So I'm not going to do anything to my mapping currently, and then I'm going to go over to my search rules. Now, hopefully by default you're able to click Use Default button. Now this is with one of the newer versions of GADS, you have access to use the defaults. That's what I've done here. I've told it to use defaults, and you see it says object class equals organizational unit. It's going to go through my org structure and it's going to find all OUs, and then it's going to automatically create those OUs up on Google. We have our exclusion rules. Note that we have a do not synchronize if deletions would exceed 5% of our organizational units. That's 5% of your organizational units that are on Google Apps. Remember, this does not do any changes to your Active Directory. All changes are done to Google. And we're going to come back to that here in a few. So next we can go down to our user accounts. Now, my mail attribute, my attribute for email address is set to mail. So it's automatically set up as mail. What I did was I told it to use defaults and it pre-populated everything for me. Now you've got this unique identifier attribute. Unique identifier attribute is so that if a staff member gets married, gets divorced, or just decides they want to change their name, so that you can change their name, change their email address in Active Directory, and then Google matches that object GUID up, and it says, oh, so they've changed their last name. I need to change that last name in Google. Well, more importantly is if you change their email address, it will automatically change their email address in Google Apps as well. Now, we also have the alias address attributes. You see that we have proxy addresses here. Now, when you make those changes in your Active Directory, you've got Sally Sue gets married. She's now Sally Jones, and her email address has now become S. Jones. You want to change that email address in your Active Directory or your directory service, and then you want to put in the proxy addresses field, you want to add in her S. Sue email address in there as well in the proxy addresses, so it will keep it as an alias for her. If you do not, by me having this right here, it will delete that alias for her the next time that GADS runs. So you want to make sure that you populate that inside of your Active Directory. If you don't want GADS to worry about aliases, you can easily just click on it and hit remove, and then it will remove the proxy addresses and won't worry about those anymore. The next thing is our Google Apps deletion suspension policy. We want to always suspend Google Apps users that are not found in your LDAP instead of deleting them. Now, the reason that is because in education, people come and go a lot. So a teacher may be here today. She then retires at the end of the school year. They can stay out for 6 months, and then after 6 months, they can come back in, substitute teaching, whatever the case may be. So if you just suspend their account, when they come back in, you can then reactivate their account. Now, that's in Google as well as in your Active Directory. Now, on the Google side, we can have as many accounts as you need. There is no limit to the Google Apps for Education for the accounts that you need. So we can always go back in and get you additional accounts. And then we've got don't suspend or delete Google Apps admins that are not found in the LDAP. So we've got additional user attributes. So we want to put in our given name. Again, if we go through and hit use defaults, it will automatically pre-populate this stuff. If you're not using the given name attribute, you may want to have to select that as something else. For the surname, the family name, last name is SN. And then we've got user password sync. So let's spend a couple of seconds here talking about this. So for only new users, by default it's set up for only new users. It's going to push a password to that user. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, for all new users, I can assign them the password of password. And then once they log in, it will automatically force them to change their password. That's great if you're not using Google Apps Password Sync, or if you're not using any other type of password synchronization tool. If you are using a password synchronization tool, you're going to need to undo the force new users to change their password. That way, users will have to change their password upon their login to your directory, to your Active Directory. It will automatically change their password up on Google as well. They will just need to log into their Active Directory prior to logging into their Google Apps account. Now, if you are a district that maintains your staff and students' email passwords, what we can do there is we can synchronize your passwords from your Active Directory and push that up to Google. So for new and existing users, if you store that in a certain attribute, there is an attribute that we've used several times with students that's alt security identities. Now, this is a hidden attribute that you can only see through the attribute editor. So if you're maintaining all student passwords, you can use that and be able to populate students' passwords every time. So every time that GADS runs, it will automatically change the students' passwords to be whatever you want it to be. So we go back over to our Active Directory, and I have my high school student here that I could go into my attribute editor, and I go down to my alt security identity, and I can say his password is whatever I may want to make it to be. So I've assigned his password to be 738599265. Now some folks have used NCWise numbers in the past. Other folks populate this field with grape 22 apple. You know, you can populate it with whatever the case is that you want to populate for the student's password. And then I can say, okay, apply, okay. And then next time that my synchronization runs, it's going to give that student their password of grape 22 apple. Now, the next thing, and I'm going to leave that there just the way that it is. Next thing is we're going to go over to our search rules. Notice that we have our search rules of active, derived, subtree, and then it's going through and looking here. Now, what I did was I used my use defaults, and we're going to open that up and take a look at it. So what this is doing is it's telling it to go through, look at my Active Directory. First thing it's going to do is it's going to say, object category, is it a person? Is it a user? Yes. Next, it says, okay, for the mail field, I want you to create an account. But the user must have this control, this account control. What this account control is, it must be an active account. If it is a suspended account, it will not create the account on Google. Now, once the account becomes back active, it will create the account on Google if it's not already there. If the account is already there, it will suspend the account if you suspend it in your Active Directory. So, we're also telling it to place the users in the following Google Apps organizational unit. It's placing them based on their organizational unit that they're in the Active Directory. Now, you can go through customizing several pieces of this, and there's more documentation online about how you can change these rules or whatever the case may be, however you want to do it. The very base minimum is to do an object class equals user, which will just say if it's a user in my Active Directory, automatically create that user up on Google. So these are options that you can go through and change. And I could test my LDAP query here if I wanted to test that out. I shouldn't have hit the test LDAP query. So if we go look at my LDAP, you see it went through, it showed me C&E admin at C&E user. It found all of these folks that are out there. So that's great. So it found accounts that are out there that it's going to want to create. Now we also have exclusion rules within our user accounts. So we can tell it do not synchronize if it's going to delete 5% of your users. Remember that we changed that to suspend your users. So we're more concerned about this suspension policy over here. Do not synchronize if the suspension would exceed 5% of your users. The times that you got to be careful with that is when you go through and you delete all of your students at the end of the year. If you're a district that deletes all of your students out of Active Directory every summer, then we've got to do some customization and some additional changes to those pieces for you. But if you were to accidentally delete all of your accounts out at one time, or something was to go awry, you deleted 1,000, 2,000 students on accident, then your fail safes would kick in and would not allow it to run. So the next piece that we have is your groups. Groups being your email distribution groups. If you're populating them in your Active Directory, for instance, if we go up and I look here, so we have several different groups. I have AC students here. If I open that AC students, if you populate the email address, so AC students at k12gapps.mcnc.org, it can be a security group or a distribution group. As long as it has that email address field, it will automatically populate that group up on Google Apps. So now if I go back to my Google Apps and I look at this group, it's going to go out and say, okay, hey, look at any object class that equals group that has an email address. It's got to have the mail field populated. Next thing is group email address. Well, it's going to look for the email address. It's looking for that mail field. Then it's going to populate the name of the group description attribute. So it's going to populate the group name up online, as well the user email address attribute. User email address attribute being the mail field of your users that are in there. Then we also, down in our members, is saying, okay, who are members of this group? So it looks inside of the attributes and it says, okay, who's the members? And it finds member and it adds those. Next is your managed by. A lot of times we end up deleting this attribute out. The reason being is because if you have an email distribution group that is restricted to where only certain individuals can edit that group, then only certain individuals can post to that group, can send to it. Those are announcement groups. We tend to take that out and add those individuals to the groups on their own. Now, one thing that you want to be careful of with Google Groups is nested groups. Nested groups don't necessarily always play nicely with Google Apps. The reason that is because when you have a group within a group, it shares or sends an email to the first group, and then it's thinking, hey, something ain't right here, I'm sending to another group. So Google Apps does not necessarily really play nicely with a group within a group. You're a lot better off as if you add individuals as themselves to a group. With our groups, we have the exclusion rules, we have our fail-safe synchronization in there as well, that we can say, okay, only 5% of our groups, if they're deleted, then do so. User profiles. User profiles are where you can populate information up on Google for the Google Apps directory. Now, this is the public address book, the Google Apps directory, that can populate different pieces of information for your folks. So if you wanted to populate what school a teacher was at, if you assign the department field or a office location, if you did it inside of your Active Directory, then it would populate that information over on Google. If you are doing 5-digit dialing extensions throughout the entire district, you could populate that telephone number over in your telephone number attribute, and it will automatically populate that up on Google as well. This helps you in the long run because as you're looking for personnel through the school district, you could have it automatically populated within your Google Apps database. And again, we use the defaults here, and it automatically populated all of this for us. Prior to that use defaults button, we had to manually go in and type all of these different types of things in. We have our search rules for user profiles. Same thing. It's going through, it's saying, hey, if this account is active, then create the profile. And there are no exclusion rules for fail-safes, because if it's not populated inside of the user profiles, then it's just not necessarily worried about. Shared contacts. Shared contacts are so that if you create a shared contact within your Active Directory environment, it will create it up online as well. This being a board member. The board member doesn't have an email address within the school district, but you still want to have them in the global address book. So you could easily populate John Smith in your Active Directory to give them an email address up on Google, or to have them automatically populate in your Active Directory. And again, we use our use defaults, and you see there it populated all the different attributes within my Google environment that I would want to populate on Google. And I can again use the same thing for my search rules. So calendar resources, we discussed this earlier in the earlier session about calendar resources. I don't necessarily recommend using the calendar resources within your environment along these lines. I would go about doing it a different way. But if you were using calendar resources in your Active Directory, you could easily populate that inside of this field as well. Notifications. So email notifications work when you are synchronizing your database, your directory. So as you go through and synchronize it, it will automatically send email. Now, two things that you want to know about. One, here you see I've got my SMTP relay host as aspmx.l.google.com. You can use this if you're sending the reports to Google or a Gmail account. You can utilize this. Now, if you're using a Exchange server still and you're only using Google Apps for the documents, Drive, creating your accounts in that mechanism, then you're going to need to either put in a SMTP server on your own network, or use another type of solution, such as you can use smtp.googleapps.com, smtp.gmail.com, and then you have to put in a username and a password field. Google does allow you to send email through them for your databases or for your different needs. So here I can use aspmx.google.com. I don't need to put in a username or a password because it sees, hey, I'm a Google Apps and I need to send to my Google Apps environment. So I can see, okay, I've got my admin account and I've got my to address. In order to even do your synchronization, you need to make sure you fill that part out. I don't like to receive the extra details or extra things past what I really need, so I turn off extra details. But I do still want to receive my errors and my warnings. And I can hit my test notifications. It says it failed. That's fine. We're not allowing port 25 outbound. So you will need to allow port 25 from your GADS box to go outbound if you do plan to use aspmx.l.google.com. So I'm going to go down to my sync. I look at my sync. Excuse me, let's go back to logging first. Logging, you can see that it's got all of it, where it's synchronized in your log file to. It's set to information by default. If you need more information in your log, you can go to a trace or a debug, whatever the case may be. Notice that my maximum log file size is 4 gig in size. That's a large file. So be careful with that. You may not want it to be that large of a log file. So I'm going to go down to my sync, and I'm going to clear cache and simulate sync. Now this is going to take a few minutes to run. Depending upon how large your district is, the simulation takes a while. Now if you have 50,000 users, 100,000 users, it could take a while to run your simulation. I have had a district that it took about an hour to run, not 45 seconds like you see here. Now I don't have as many users or things along those lines that are created. Now, once I've got my account here, I can see that it's analyzed my organizations. It sees 23 local being on your Active Directory. And I've got 11 that are remote. It says I've got 11 extra and 25 new that it wants to create. Now, the reason that it's giving me this is because I've got several OUs that are out on Google that I've manually created. Now, when I manually created those, I didn't necessarily really plan on synchronizing my AD, or this is a test bed environment for us. So I'm not necessarily going to delete those, and we're not going to worry about those right now. Now, if I look down at my create organizations, notice that it says it's going to create 25 organizations. Notice that it created org and created C&E and then all of the other fields that I had in my Active Directory. Well, that's not necessarily what I wanted. So one of the things that I can do is I can go back and modify my GADS file to push everything over to the very far left. Because the way that it will look right now is I will have a folder or a container called org, and then underneath it a folder called C&E, and underneath it then I have all of these others. Now if you're a K-12 NC US, you have US, then NC, then K-12, and then your district, and then all of your OUs that you have underneath there. So you're going to want to pay close attention to that. Now I see that I've got 8 users local and 44 remote. I'm going to modify 35 users and create 8. Notice that these accounts that I've already got created up online, it sees those accounts and it says, hey, you know, I'm going to suspend all these because they're not in your Active Directory. Now if I scroll down, then it wants to create 8 accounts. C&E admin, that's fine. And notice that it's going to give me my given name and my family name, and then it's going to push up the different pieces and put them in the different organizational units that they need to be in. Okay, this is the piece that you want to make sure that you pay attention to with your Active Directory, your GADS. Now, notice that if I look right here, my HS staff is going into org, C&E, Google Test, staff, HS, HS1. That's fine. We're going to check back in on that here in just a minute. And you see that it's got 1 local group and 7 remote. So it automatically sees 7 groups that are already created out there that it wants to get rid of. And then it's going to create 1 group of AC students. And then 44 additional profiles. This is additional profiles that Google says, hey, GADS says these should not be there. We need to delete all of these different ones. And we can go through and delete those manually or whatever we may need to do. Now, I had pre-populated student underscore 2. Evidently, we got a contact out there for M. Brown as well that we've been working with. So you see that it's updating profile information for 2 users. Student 2, that's a 2014 graduate, and then also it's populating an office location and a work phone location for M. Brown. Okay. Now, what I want to do is go back to my org units, and I want to push everything over to that far right-hand side. Well, if I go up here to my Google Apps, my LDAP, excuse me, and I want to do OU equals Google test, comma, DC equals CNE. Let's go verify that. Let's make sure it's Google test, correct. It is in that area. I can test my connection, succeeded still. So now when I go to my org units, it's going to only look for that Google test and everything. Well, what I want to do is I want to add a mapping to say my base DN of Google test, excuse me, OU equals Google test, comma, DC equals CNE, comma, DC equals org. Is it org or .net? Org. And then for my Google Apps location, I want to create this all the way over on the very far right. Excuse me, left. So I want it to slam all the way over to the side so it does not create a CNE and .org folder structure. So I'm going to say OK and OK, or apply and OK. And I'm going to go back and do my simulate sync again. So now it's going to go through and run again. Now this is just creating our process, creating our GADS. Remember, we don't have a whole lot of things in there. Now you see it says there's 9 local and 11 remote, and it's extra 11, and then new, it's going to create 8. It still wants to delete all of those that I've already got out there. That's fine. We're not going to worry about that today. But then you notice that it's creating my OUs that I asked it to. Inside of my, if you look here, inside of my Google test, I have staff, HS, HS1, MS, students, HS, and MS. So it's creating my staff and my students and then the folders that are underneath them. This gives you the capability of not having a whole bunch of extra folders in there that you don't necessarily need. Now as well, if we also had a folder that was inside of our high school, we create a container. I want to create an org unit, and I'm just going to call this computers. Now, if I go back and run my sync, my simulate sync, it's going to tell me that there's a folder called computers. Well, I don't really need a folder up on my Google called computers, so because there's not going to be any individual users in there. So I want to get rid of that. So my next step then is I go back to my org units and I go to my exclusion rules and I tell it don't add anything that has the word computers in it. And I change that to a substring match so that it will not create that account up on Google Apps. So I go back to my sync, go to my simulate, and then it's going to run through again. And this time you're not going to see my computers in the listing. So if we look here, we see all of those. And computers is no longer in our create organizations. Now, I want to get rid, I don't want it to give me errors for my delete organizations. I want it to leave all grades, and I want it to leave test in there. So what I'm going to do I'm going to go over here to my Google Apps configuration and tell it in the exclusion rules there, I want to add an exclusion rule. Anytime you need to add an exclusion to where there's an account that you don't ever want GADS to delete, or you don't want it to mess with an organizational unit, we can go in here and tell it, okay, organizational complete path, and I can say test. Okay, and if I must have closed out of that. So now if I go to my simulate sync, now you notice, now my test is gone. Now if I do one for all underscore grades in my Google Apps configuration, again, go up to organizational complete path, substring match, all underscore grades, apply, okay. I run my simulation sync. Now with my simulation sync I'm running, now it is going to be gone and I'm not going to have that in there anymore either. Now I'm down to only 2 organizational that it wants to delete.
How are those two exclusion rules different? The ones in the org unit and that configuration?
Okay. Excellent question just came in. Question came in, okay, what are the differences between the org unit exclusion rule that I created and the other one? Now, where those come into play at is if you look in the org unit one, in this setting, in the org units, it's telling it, don't look at anything that's in my Active Directory, my local directory environment that's named computers. In the Google Apps configuration area, this is telling it anything that's already out there on the cloud, already in Google, don't do anything to it. It's important information. I know I've got it out there and it's wrong, but I need to keep it out there. You can exclude it and then it won't try to delete those anymore that are already out there on Google. So if it's out there on Google and you don't want to delete it or create it, or excuse me, if you don't want to delete it, exclude it in your Google Apps configuration exclusions. If it's in your Active Directory and you don't want to create it on Google, exclude it in that area, either into org units, in the user accounts, or the groups. You've got the same thing in the user accounts. If there's an account that you don't want to create up on Google that's in your Active Directory, you can add an exclusion rule there and say if it has this email address, for instance, we had the one that was Bladen. So at bladen.k12ncus, I can put that in there and say don't do anything with that if it's there. Hope that makes sense. If not, get with me afterwards and I'll make sure I explain that better. So if I go through and I simulate my sync again, notice how quick that ran. It's not looking at nowhere near the amount of information, and it's wanting to just create my staff OUs and then my users. It's wanting to suspend all of those users that I've already created up online. That's fine. Now, if I was to the point that I'm ready to turn this on, let it go live, you can hit the red button if you want to. I would only hit the red button if you are absolutely certain everything looks right. Okay? That's when you can hit the red button to automatically synchronize it. I wish Google would not have put that in there, but I understand why they did it as well. So our next thing is I like to save my file, and then I like to save it in another directory. So I like to go File, Save As, and then I like to stick my files in the Google Apps Directory Sync folder. So I go into my Program Files, Google Apps Directory Sync, and I like to save it inside of that folder. The reason that we save it in that folder is so that we can go back and when we set up our daily time frames to synchronize, that it will automatically pull from that area. So if I say, okay, GADS K12GApps.xml, save, it's successfully saved in that area. Now I need to go ahead and close out of Google Apps directory sync. We've got to set this up to run on an automated process. We need this to run every day at a certain time. So I can go to my All Programs, go to Accessories, go to System Tools, and then I can set up a scheduled task. Inside of server environment, it's going to be labeled as Task Scheduler. So I've got my scheduled task. It's going to come up here and let me create a scheduled task. So now I can add a scheduled task. When you create these tasks, if you have multiple servers, multiple environments, you're going to have to do some customization. Now, I've had several districts that we maintain staff in one directory, students in another directory. We've done as much as 3 directory services before, and it's working beautifully. But we can do whatever the case is that you may need. Now, as well, if you are maintaining your students' passwords, then we can we're going to need 2 synchronization files, one for your staff and one for your students, to be able to push the passwords for just the one or the other. So here I've navigated to my Google Apps Directory Sync folder, because I've got to tell it I want to run a certain program. So I navigate to my Google Apps Directory Sync folder, and I tell it to choose my sync-command. This is a command line interface to run the XML file and do the settings as needed. So I say OK. So I can call this whatever I want. I want to call it GADS Sync. Now, when do you want this to run? Well, I like for mine to run at least once a day, if not more than that. So I'm going to set mine to run daily. I like for it to run at 12 o'clock noon. Now, if you are a district that does a lot of changes to your Active Directory, or you do whatever the case may be, you may want to have it set to synchronize every 4 hours, every hour, every 2 hours. Whatever the case may be, you can do so. Or you can have it do it just once a day if you want to as well. So here, I'm going to do 12 o'clock starting 12 o'clock tomorrow. Or I'm going to just tell it to do it every one day at 12 p.m. That's great. Every day at 12 p.m. it's going to run. Now I've got to put in my credentials. I say next. Now, realize this is a Windows XP box. It does not have all the features and functionality of the scheduled task as you do with the Windows 7 or on your server environment. So I want to open up the advanced properties because I need to do some other stuff to this. So I want it to run program files, Google Apps Directory Sync, sync-command.exe, space, -A, because we want it to actively run, space, -C for configuration file, and the name of my file that I named it. Now, if I can't remember my name of my file, I can go back to my computer, C drive, show the contents, program files, boy. And then I can go back and get the name of my file. Oh, GADS K12GApps. Well, I can just copy that. And I need to put that at the end of my line. So I've got my sync-cmd.exe -A -C GADS-K12GApps.xml, because this is an XML file, and I want it to automatically run. The schedule is every day at 12 o'clock. You can set up multiple schedules if you want to. And then if it does not run, if it does not start, it'll stop it in 72 hours. I can say apply. Got to authenticate again. And say, okay, now I have a scheduled task that will start tomorrow at 12 o'clock and will run every day at 12 o'clock to automatically create my users for me. Now, once that runs, it will also email you what was right, what was wrong, what it created, suspended, and deleted. All of those options, it will send you an email provided that you put in that information into your notifications area. So if my scheduled task is up and running, we're going to have to use our imagination and say that we ran this and it ran and it deleted and suspended all of those accounts. The next thing that we need to do in setting up our Google Apps is we need to set up Google Apps password sync. Now, yesterday I went and downloaded Google Apps password sync. So, and the links are in the show notes for today, but I've got Google Apps password sync. I need to run it. It's going to install. It wants to install this piece of software. I accept, install. Now, Google Apps password sync. It installs on your domain controller. You must install this on all of your domain controllers where passwords would be changed. Now, with this as well, when you change a password or when you want it to synchronize, you must change the password in Active Directory in order for it to push that password to Google Apps. So it tells me my installation completed successfully. Okay. I click finish. It's going to want to restart. I can go ahead and restart the server or let it restart at a later time. You must let it restart in order for it to take effect with your password synchronization tools. I'm not going to let this restart currently because of time and things along those lines. I'm not going to let it restart, but I am going to go ahead and launch the Google Apps password sync service because I want you to go through the piece here with me. So if I go ahead and bring this up, it takes me through. This is release 1.1. Google Apps password sync is still new, but it's working fairly well. Districts that I've had have been running it successfully for over a year now and without any concerns. So we can go ahead and configure provisioning the API. We've already done that. We went through, turned those features on earlier. So we go ahead and say next. Our Google Apps domain, k12gapps.mcnc.org. And our admin URL domain name or ID, k12gapps.mcnc.org. And I need to authorize now. That's me. Continue. We're now launching a preferred web browser. I need to log in. It would like to provision users on your domain. GAPS, the only thing Google Apps Password Sync does is synchronize passwords. It pushes passwords to your Google Apps accounts. I accept. Authorization has been granted successfully. Switch to the application. It says I'm authorized now. Wonderful. I say next. Now it needs to hook to my directory. Well, my directory is this server, so CNE /CNE admin, my password, and then it's asking me for my base DN again. Now remember, my base DN I changed on my GADS. So if you're using a different base DN on your GADS, you're going to want to use a different base DN on your password sync as well. So here I need OU equals Google test, comma. Now, the mail attribute. What this does is it looks to see what is the email address that you want to change on Google. In order to change the email address on Google, you have to tell it what's the mail attribute on Google. So it's mail in 90% of the cases. This is what you're populating in your Active Directory, that you're populating that account up on Google. If it's not, you're going to need to change this mail attribute to whatever you're pulling from to populate as the email address on Google. Now, in my case, this is mail. In your case, it may be something else. Maybe you're populating the email address in the description field or somewhere else. Wherever it may be that you're populating that, we need to make sure we're pulling and pushing that up to Google from there. We'll go ahead and say next. Our server's thinking about it. And that should be the end of our setup. So with the Google Apps password sync, of course, something always goes wrong. More than likely, this is not responding because I did not do the reboot on my server. This is where you want to make sure that you do a reboot on your server, and then it should automatically start your service and be starting to synchronize your users, so that when you change your user's password, it will automatically change up on Google Apps for you as well. I want to just close the program. Once you activate that, it starts running as a service. So then if we go to our administrative tools and our services, inside of our services, you will see Google Apps Password Sync, Google Apps Password, and it's set as automatic. It should be running as a service for you. After your reboot, it will automatically start as a service. Yeah, it's starting and stop because I don't have the configuration. I have not done the reboot yet. So it should be running for you if you do a reboot of your service. Now, you're going to want to reboot that server. You're going to want to install GADS and do the installation during your maintenance window. And then in order for the password to synchronize with Google, your users will have to do the Control-Alt-Delete, change password, or you're going to need to require the user to change password upon next login. So we go in and we go to our properties and we just tell it to force change password for them. Before we get into the command line, Tim, do we have any other questions right now? Okay, wonderful. So we get time to talk about my favorite tool. The one that I use all the time is called Google Apps Password Sync. Excuse me, not Google Apps Password Sync. Sorry, guys. Google Apps Manager. So Google Apps Manager is a third-party tool. A gentleman wrote it himself, and then the company that he worked for ended up purchasing it from him. So Ditto, D-I-T-O, produces this now as a cloud service for folks to take advantage of. School districts all across the U.S. are taking advantage of it, as well as businesses and all different types of folks are taking advantage of it. So Jay over here at Ditto Web is the creator of the application. So you can go to the downloads and download the version that you need. So you can get the 32-bit or 64-bit for your machine. Now I'm going to go ahead and download the 32-bit because this server that I'm on is a 32-bit machine. Now it's downloaded, it's in my downloads directory, and I've got GAM 3.0-Windows Zip. Now I need to clean up my machine just a little bit. So if I go into my C drive, I have a folder called GAM already. I like to delete that. Sorry about that, I had it open. So what I like to do is open up my Google Apps Manager, and you see I have a folder there called GAM. Inside of it, you see all the different options that are out there and available to you. So I go back, and I like to copy that GAM folder. I copy it to my C drive. So I drag and drop it, copy that over to my directory. So I have GAM now, and it gives me access to create a lot of different types of things. So as well, if I bring back up the Ditto site, there is a wiki. This wiki takes you through from installing to managing, doing a lot of different types of things with your users. Well, in order to use GAM, you've got to launch from the command line. So I go into GAM. Whoop. Expand this window out just a little bit. And I can do GAM info domain. That's the first thing you need to do because you've got to grant access to your domain. GAM is made possible by Ditto. Who is Ditto gives you a little information. Well, it's already selected everything there for you. I need to type in an 18 and hit enter. It says warning, configure OAuth 2.0. Great. So one of the things that it's telling me to do is make sure to make GAM run, you need to populate the client's secrets JSON file. So what we need to do is we need to go to code.google.com/APIs/console. So if I open that up, so I go to my code.google.com. It's asking me to log in. I need to log in as admin.k12gapps. The reason that this is that we have to go through this process now is we've got to get that client secrets built, because this allows us to be able to do push and pulls from our Google Apps in instances that you would not be able to do at other times. So if I say create, we've got to turn on several different things. One is the admin SDK. We need to turn that on and accept that. Then we need to scroll down. We need to turn on the calendar API. The calendar API gives you access to be able to do several different things inside the calendar. We need to turn on Enterprise License Manager. And we need to turn on Drive API and Drive SDK. And then if we go ahead and scroll on down through, one more, we need to turn on the contacts. And then if we scroll on down through, we shouldn't see anything else necessarily that we need to turn on. The rest of them are good to go. We don't necessarily need to worry about the rest of those. So now if we go back up to our overview, we've got our project code number. We need to go down to our, they've changed this on me again. Oh, APIs and auth. I'm sorry. So we've got to go down to our registered apps. We've got to register an app. This is a, give it a name. I call mine GAM. And it is a native Windows Mobile, BlackBerry desktop device application. We register. Now it gives us our JSON file. We can then tell it to download. And we have our client secret. Now, if I open that file, I have my GAM still open there. I can drag my JSON, my client secrets over, drop it. Now, if I run GAM again, GAM info domain, 18, enter, it's still fussing at me. I've got to change that, the name of it. It added a bunch of other stuff to it. Oh, come on. Okay. Out of respect, out of your time, I'm going to take you to my working module. The old website was easier to navigate. They just changed that on me. So here you see I have a Citrix environment up and running, and if I go to my command line, if I do a dir, one of the things that you're going to see that I've got is I have GAMs running for a lot of different districts that I've worked with. A lot of folks that I've got access into, whatever the case may be. So I do a CD into GAM-K12GApps. Now I can do my GAM info domain, and this will pull up information about my domain. So I can see, okay, I see that I've got access to create 42,000 users, but I'm only created 44 users in my K12GApps right now. Now, for your domain, you're going to be able to see this as well. Now, within this environment, things that I've told you you'll be able to do. For instance, you're going to be able to pull reports. If I go look at my example provisionings, you'll see what you can do. You can create users. If we need to create a bunch of users at one time that we don't have in a Active Directory, we can do this from a command line interface. We can do GAM create user, yada, 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 yada. As well, we can update users. If we've got a lot of people that have changed their password, or we need to change passwords for a bunch of people, we can do GAM update user, their email address, the password, and what do you want to set their password to be. We can update that information. We need to suspend accounts. We can suspend accounts. We can do a lot of different types of things. We can get user information. So we can do GAM info user and the email address, and we can get information about that person. Okay, have they agreed to the terms? Do they have a delegate? Are they a super admin? Is their mailbox set up? If their mailbox isn't set up, then we know that they've never logged in. We can see different types of things if you're giving them access to the different pieces, whatever the case may be, that you're populating inside of there. Now, reporting features, if I scroll back up, we can take advantage of auditing user accounts. Auditing user accounts meaning you can set up an audit key to be able to log in, audit accounts, and be able to get back out. Now, as well, you can export user inboxes through GAM. So if a user leaves the district, you can go and get an export of their inbox, of their email. We can print users. Printing users' information. So if I was to go in here and on my Citrix window, I do GAM print users all fields. And I can tell it to pipe it to a CSV file. All fields.csv. What this does is it goes through, reads my account, tells me, oh, well, I found 44 users' information, and I've dumped it in there for you to be able to go read. So if I go into my GAM, I've got my all fields. Now, from here, you get a CSV file of email, first name, last name, full name, username, the OU that the user is in. Are they suspended? Now, this is great. If we have a bunch of suspended accounts, say that these three are true. These accounts are suspended. I can filter this to give me just my suspended accounts that are true. Now, I do this with several folks, and this is how easy it is. I get a district to call me and say, hey, we've got, a lot of suspended accounts. How can we get rid of all of them at one time? So I'll pull this all fields report. It'll tell me how many of them are suspended. And then I just go equals GAM delete user, and then I tell it the username was in A2. Okay, enter. Then it gives me the script to run, and I can easily populate that down, and now I can easily copy this and paste it on my command line to delete all of those users at one time. Now, I've got one school district, they were here earlier this morning, they had to leave, but we moved, they don't currently have a directory service for their students. So what we do is we have a set of scripts that run at the beginning of the school each year. We'll go through, we'll filter it by their students. If their email address ends in student dot whatever, then we suspend all of those accounts. Then, with the new file that they give me, I go through and tell it to create any new accounts that need to be created and reactivate any new accounts that need to be reactivated. So then we do it all through the script rather than going through and manually doing it by hand. We can do it with the GAM to automatically suspend all the accounts that need to be suspended, then reactivate them back, the ones that are still students in the school, and then move the ones that need to be moved to a different OU. So the OU, we get a CSV file that has the information in it that needs to be moved around, whatever the case may be. So they get a CSV file from PowerSchool that tells us these students are at this school, this grade level. Then we can create the students, create the OUs, push them all around however we need to push the students. There is power within the command line interface to be able to do a lot of things that folks don't think they can do. So we can also print all the aliases. So you can go in and pull all aliases that people have inside of your domain. Print it out to a CSV file. We can print your organizational structure. If you need a printout of it, we can print that. We can do resource calendars. We can print all the mobile devices. Do a query to tell you exactly what mobile devices, when was the last time they were synced, all the different pieces of that. We can query it and bring all of that information back to you in a string. We can also print your Chromebook devices. Now, with Chromebooks, we can update this information as needed. We can not only pull a report of the information, but we can push information on your Chromebooks. Now, one of the big things with the Chromebooks is you manually have to move them to where they're at. Well, with the Chromebooks, we can actually update that information. We can update the device ID. We get the device ID off the box, and then we can easily say, okay, it's now assigned to user J. Smith, and then the location is whatever high school, middle school, whatever the case may be, and then you can assign notes to it if you need to or whatever. We can also update the OU that you want that Chromebook to be in. That way, if you've got a student or a testing or whatever the case may be, we can move these things around from the command line interface rather than you having to do it manually. So from here, I encourage you to go through, take a look at the command line interface. Now, if you have a large bulk of accounts, say 2,000 to 3,000 that you're going to be doing, what I recommend to folks is to run it through Google Spreadsheet or Excel, your choice. You can then copy it and paste it into Notepad. Paste it in there and just create this as a little bash script. So then I can tell it save as, and I can save it as a BAT file. Well, I don't want to be under BCS WAN. I need to be underneath my other one. So I can save this as delete suspended .bat. I then can run it from my command line. Delete suspended .bat, and it will delete those accounts that I've told it that were suspended. Any questions, Tim?
Yeah, you've got the question. The first one's about Google Apps password sync.
Okay.
And how long does it take to run? How long does it take password sync to finish? One question.
How long does it take password sync to finish
Split it.
install?
No, finish the sync.
Normally it's somewhere around between instantaneous and about 5 minutes. Depends upon how many users are changing their password at one time.
But it doesn't sync until the password's changed.
Correct. It does. So the question was, how long does it take for the password sync to synchronize the password? The password, you must change it the first time in Active Directory, and then as soon as you change that password in Active Directory, it should instantaneously push that password to Google Apps for you. If it takes longer, sometimes it'll take a couple of minutes to get pushed up there because of congestion. If you've got a lot of users that are hitting one server, changing their password all at one time, that will happen.
The other one was, will student emails be lost when you push them out for the new school year?
So the other question was, will student emails be lost if you what?
When you push them out for the,
So if you delete them out of Active Directory, I'm guessing.
that's my interpretation.
So the question is will student emails be lost if you push them out each year or delete them? So with Google Apps Directory Sync, what we end up doing, I've got several districts that utilize Google Apps Password Sync. And I want to show you a setting that we change. So if I open up my Google App, my configuration manager. Now, inside of the user accounts area, if you are planning to delete your students out of if you are planning to delete your students out every year out of Active Directory, we need to delete this object GUID. We need to delete out the object GUID because every year it's going to create a new unique identifier each time you bring that student in. So if you do plan to delete all of your students out of Active Directory, but you don't delete your staff out of Active Directory, then what we need to do is set up two separate synchronizations. One for your staff that does have the object GUID, because hopefully your students aren't the ones that are getting married or name changes as much as your staff. So we have a staff that is we have the object GUID set up in there. And then for students, we have a separate run that does not have your object GUID in there, so that we can turn that one off. And those students, you dump them out of AD every year, or eDirectory or whatever. You delete them out of eDirectory, and then you bring them back in, and then they all have the same email address, and nothing changes. So we can do that. It is very well possible, and we've done that in the past. So if you have any questions on it, talk to me later. We can make sure that that's not going to be an issue for you or anything. Okay.
Can you test run a command in GAM without running it as a live command, similar to the way you can test your config with GADS before you run it live?
So the question is, with GAM, can you test run a command? What I recommend you do in that situation, the short answer is no. Once you run it, it's ran. But in another way, though, you can have, instead of running it for a large group of users, run it for just one user first, make sure it's going to work the way that you want it, and then turn around and run it for a large group of users. And you say you had another one? Same question coming in. So I highly recommend you take a look at using GAM, using GAPS, using GADS, and the different ways that you can use them. Now, from here at MCNC, we've worked with a lot of folks on setting up GADS, GAM, whatever the case may be. We're available to you guys to work with you on it, whether it's just walking you through again, coming out, working with you on your GADS instance, looking at it, giving you another set of eyes, or helping you set it up. Whatever the case may be, we're here to work with you guys. Some additional resources I've got right here: the Google Apps Directory Sync, Password Sync, and the Manager. This is just some short little links here. We're going to be providing some additional training coming up here soon on using these tools, especially the Google Apps Manager, more intensely, because there's so many things we can do with it past user creation. I can't tell you guys how many times I used the GAM tool to run to be able to pull information. I use it just about daily, probably, for different districts, different accounts, and everything. So we are available. We've gone through several questions. We're going to take a few more seconds. If anybody has any questions, we're here to answer those as well. Please make sure that you sign in for today's session. We do want to send out an evaluation, get your feedback, because without your feedback, we're not able to improve upon where we're at and the different types of trainings that we're providing. So if you could, please take a moment to sign in for today. As well, we will be doing the webinars again next week, so we'll be adding a little bit of information to it. I know I had a comment earlier today. We actually went over in the first session and said that we went a little bit fast and that they were probably going to be attending next week as well, so that they could catch back up. But the sessions are being recorded, and we will be providing them out on the internet probably next week. Into next week, we'll probably have it posted out on the internet for everyone. But if there's no other questions, thank you for coming out, and we'll be around for a couple more minutes if you have any questions.